looking in Colossians, and we are finally to Colossians chapter 2. And before we jump in, I just want to ask, if you could choose what your kids were going to be like when they grew up, what would you decide? I'm not talking about what career they would have. I'm not talking about like who they would marry. I'm not talking about how much money they would have. I'm talking about who they would be, what kind of people they would be. What would you decide? Now, the thing is, you have ability to influence that and to shape that. But most of us just don't think about it. We're just like, let's keep them alive, let's keep them out of jail, let's let them know Jesus and get them out of the house. That's the goal. And so whatever we have to throw at them to do that is what we do. But if we spend some time thinking about, like, what do I want my kids to be like, then it would change how you parent, right? For us, we really want the kids, let's take the spiritual stuff out of it, we really want the kids to be responsible. And so we do things to build responsibility within them. We have to make a conscious choice. So we give them responsibilities to fulfill. Beckham mows the backyard, Quinn mows the front yard, Cooper weed eats, and they all fight the whole time. That's their responsibility. I don't think the last part is a responsibility, but they've taken it on boldly. And then they've got kitchen jobs at night. Somebody's washing dishes, somebody's cleaning the counters, somebody's cleaning the floors. This is every night we're doing this. They're responsible for their own laundry. And if we don't accomplish anything else, we're going to make them responsible. That's what we're going for. Because we have this idea about who we want our kids to be, and so we make choices to get them to that point. Now, Paul is writing not to children, but he's writing to a church. This church could just be considered his grandchildren, because this church was not started by him. It was not started by any apostle, but rather it was started by a guy named Epaphroditus, who heard Paul when he preached, when Paul was doing his ministry in Ephesus. He heard Paul. He goes back to Colossae and he starts a church there. And so they have a lot of problems. They come back, they send Epaphroditus to Paul and say, help us, please. And Paul writes this letter back, really writing a letter to his grandchildren in the faith. People that were not led to the Lord by him or taught by him, but people that were led to the Lord and taught by someone he led to the Lord. It's this generational thing that they're doing. And he writes this letter, and in chapter 1, he talked about his prayer for them. Like, he prayed the specific things he wanted them to have. He talked about who Jesus was and what he did and what the Father did through him. And then in the end of chapter 1, he really went through and talked about himself and what his purpose is for the ministry that he's doing. Today, he's going to tell us what he wants for them. Not what he wants them to have, but who he wants them to be when they grow up. The kind of church he wants them to be. And he lays that all out at the beginning of Colossians chapter 2. And we're just going to jump in and read what Paul says he wants for this church. Colossians chapter 2, verse 1, for I want you to know how great a struggle I have for you and for those at Laodicea and for all who have not seen me face to face. He starts with that, and he's saying, like, this is what I want for you who I've not met, but are my grandchildren in the faith. Laodicea is a church in the same boat. It's just down the road from Colossae. They're in Turkey. It's very likely Epaphroditus started and pastored the church at Laodicea as well. And so he says to them, he mentions Laodicea a couple times. He says, I want you to share this letter with them because I'm writing you this letter, but go ahead and send it to them as well. But he says this thing that just kind of resonates with me that Paul probably didn't even realize he was saying. He says, I have this desire and this struggle. This is what I want for you. This is what I want for the church at Laodicea. And who else? All those that I have not seen face to face. Paul doesn't know it, but this is his desire for us. It's not just his desire for them, but all those that have not had an apostle sitting over them and teaching them, the ones that they have to look at from a distance and say, what's going to happen to these people that are not being led or taught or started by someone who was with Jesus and met Jesus? Are they going to be able to continue? What's going to happen? And it's kind of that way, I assume it's kind of that way with your grandchildren. Don't have any yet, praise the Lord. We've got that down the road. But when you look at your grandchildren and you've got these children that you raised in between you and them, and you just kind of watch and say, well, I hope it works out. This is what I want. This is what I want. And he says, I want to be there with you so bad, but I can't. And for all those churches that will not have an apostle, that will not have me down the road, Let me tell you what I want. If I could tell you, if I could decide for you what kind of church you were going to be, this is what I would ask for you. And so when we look at the letter to Colossians, and I've talked about this several times, this is the church that's closest to us. So we want to take this and say, what would Paul say to us? And this is what he says to us about what kind of church he wants us to be. He said, I want you to know how great a struggle I have for you and for those at Laodicea, those who have not seen me face to face. Verse 2, and this is what I want, that their hearts may be encouraged. He says, the first thing that I want, the first thing on my list that I ask for is not doctrinal purity. It's not huge facilities. It's not big budgets. It's not the coolest music. The thing that I want most for you, and right off the bat, is that you would be a people of hope, that you would be encouraged. You ever been a part of a church that has no hope? They've just lost that hope. They're not encouraged about anything. It doesn't matter what happens. There's nothing there. And what follows that is the church just dies out, because when you lose that encouragement, it doesn't matter how doctrinally pure you are. When you have no hope, when you're focused more on the cost than the results, something happens to a church. And he says, look, here's what I want for you. We can fix doctrinal problems. We can fix the teaching. We can fix all of that. You can grow. Things can be different over time. But if you don't have hope that what you're doing matters, if you don't have hope that Jesus is going to answer those prayers that you're praying, if you're not even praying those prayers because you don't expect anything, there's no encouragement in you, then that church is on the way out. And he says, the thing that I want for you is for you to be a church filled with hope, that you do the work that Jesus has called you to with an expectation of success in that work. That when you pray for rain, you carry an umbrella. Dennis, you got an umbrella in the car? Okay. I got on to him last week talking about rain for the cows, and he ain't got an umbrella in the car. Like, listen, we need to be a church that hopes, that's excited about what's happening, that's excited about who walks in the door. And Paul says, I want this for you. And you think about this church, what they were going to deal with. Right? They're already dealing with division. They're dealing with these big heresies that come in and trying to figure out what's true. They have been separated from their culture, because their culture is all about the worship of these other things, and everything in their culture is wrapped up in their religion. And now they've had to step away from that, and they've got this one family. This is all that they have, are these people, because everybody else has rejected them. All that they have is the people in this church. And that church is so divided and so frustrated with each other over these different things. And he says, you're going to lose hope. I'm worried you're going to lose hope and that you're going to quit. And so I want for you hearts that are encouraged. When you lose that hope, what you start to think about is, well, you know, we've tried that before and it didn't work. So we're just not going to do anything. You say, well, that person, they've been here, and then they leave, and they've been here, and then they leave, and then they've been here, and they leave. They commit, and they drop out, and they commit, and they drop. So we're just not even going to give them another chance, because we know what's going to happen. But a church that's encouraged continues. A church that hope continues. And they don't say, what's the cost? We got to count the cost. But they don't say, what's going to be the cost? They say, what's going to be the results? They're not discouraged by how much it will cost them, not just financially, but sacrificially, individually, by time and emotion and the hurt that comes from continuing to hope. But he says, that's what I want for you. I want you to be a church that hopes, that prays prayers with expectations that God will answer, that continues to work with an expectation of success. Church at Colossae, if I could make one thing happen for you, I would make you a church that's encouraged and a church that hopes. He says, here's what I want for you. After you've got hope, I want you to be knit together in love. This knit together, this is the picture that I have in mind of this being knit together. Quinn crochets all the time. This is what she does. getting ready to go on a cruise, and she's talking about, can I take an audiobook so that I can crochet while I'm listening to audiobook? Like, this is, like, she just wants to take pieces of string and turn them into other things. The problem with a lot of churches, and it's okay that it happens that way, hopefully it goes from there, but the problem with a lot of churches is they come in and they come to a church for the pastor. They like the preaching of that pastor. They come, and their connection to that church, the thing they're tied to in that church, is the pastor. And so you have a pastor, and you have a bunch of strings coming off of that, connecting him to people. And what happens with that? What happens when you find out that that pastor is just a man? What happens when God moves that pastor to somewhere else? The church just kind of falls apart. Because they weren't tied to each other. They were just tied to him. And Paul says, here's what I want for you. I want you to be knit together. That you're not just connected to one person in this church, but you are wrapped together with each other. It's okay if you came into this church and the thing that captured your attention, the thing that made you wanted to stay was my preaching. It just means you have good taste. That's fine. It's okay to start that way. It is not okay to stay that way. You need connections throughout the church because I will mess up. And if your link to this church, if your link to the faith is me, you have a very unstable foundation. Paul says, I don't want you to just be connected to Epaphroditus. You need to be connected to each other. You need to be tied together with one another, wrapped together with one another. How do you do that? He says, I want you to be knit together in love. That your love for one another binds you together. So that instead of being a bunch of strings tied to one nail, you become a blanket that holds together regardless of whether one string comes out or not. He says, I want you to be knit together in love. I want you to have love for each other. Not love for the institution, not love for the pastor, not love for a specific ministry, but love for the other people around you. And if you will find that, then this church with hope and being knit together in love will endure anything. I grew up in churches where the norm was for a pastor to stay 2 years or less. And the good thing about, there's very few good things about that, but the good thing about that was those churches, if you stayed in that church, it was not because of the pastor, because he was going to be gone before the next Christmas. You were connected to each other. And that's what Paul wants for us. Not to turn over pastor every 2 years, but to be knit together in love. Now, when we talk about love in the Bible, we are not talking about feelings. When we talk about love in the Bible, it's never feelings. It's always actions. It's behavior. And when we say we want to be knit together in love, that doesn't mean we just want to feel nice toward each other, but that we perform the actions of love toward one another. Paul says this in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. He is not talking about marriage. He's talking to a church, and he describes to them what love is. He said, love is patient and kind. Love is patient and kind. Love doesn't get in a hurry or run people over or get frustrated that people are taking too long to grow, but love continues with people. Love does not envy or boast. Love does not say, I'm better than you. Let me show you how much better I am than you. Let me look down on you, and you're a help case, you're a charity case, and I'm going to look down on you because of what you need from me because I'm so great. But love sees each other as equals and gives equal grace. Love is not arrogant or rude. This is the losing patience, looking down on other people who are taking longer to grow than you feel like they should, but rather continues with them and is not arrogant about how much you've grown, looking down on them about how much they haven't accomplished, rude to them because they take too long to get to the place that you want them to be. But love restrains that and continues to give mercy and grace. Love does not insist on its own way. I struggle with this one because obviously my way is the best possible way. And the idea of letting somebody else choose the way and just on purpose doing something wrong drives me crazy. But love recognizes the difference between Jesus' way and my way. One of the conversations we have to have a lot, especially with leaders who are in new leadership positions, and maybe this is a thing that you deal with at work too when it comes to delegation. You say, well, I can't delegate. I can't let anybody else do that because they're not going to do it the way I want them to. They're not going to do it as well as me, so I have to do it myself. Love does not insist on its own way. And not insisting on your own way requires you to be okay with other people failing. Requires you to be okay with other people messing up. It requires you to be okay with other people learning, and things are not always going to go the way that I want them to, simply because if we do everything my way, I'm going to do it myself, and we're never going to get anywhere. But if we want to go places together, it requires us to have the patience of allowing other people to do things their way and fail and continue to love them as they learn and as they grow. The kids do not load the dishwasher the way I want it loaded. I have to decide, do I want the dishwasher loaded the way I want it loaded, or do I want them to learn responsibility? And as we grow as a church and other people step in to do things, love requires that we not insist on our own way, but rather that we allow other people in, we give them opportunities to do things, and we continue to love them even if it doesn't go the way it needs to go. Love is not irritable or resentful. Love doesn't hang on to offenses of the past, but offers forgiveness. If you've got somebody in this church that every time you look at them, all you can think about is something that they did 5 years ago, you have a problem. The problem is not theirs, it's yours. Love is not irritable or resentful. It does not hang on to those offenses, but releases those offenses and offers forgiveness. It gives people another chance. And if you're still hanging on to stuff from the past that somebody in this church has done, you're not being loving. You're in direct disobedience to Paul, the apostle. And you have sin that you need to repent of. Because love is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the church. That love doesn't celebrate what's bad for somebody, but only celebrates what's good for them. And that means sometimes making hard decisions. It means sometimes making hard stands. I heard somebody talk about the gender issue and talk about people like, do you use their pronouns? Do you use their names? What do you do? And it's a real question because the Bible doesn't say a whole lot about that. Obviously, you can't swap genders, but how do we talk to people? What do we use? And I heard a guy talk about this, and he said, look, there is something inside them that is telling them that they are the worst thing in the world. And the best thing that can happen is to kill themselves and become somebody different. So they want to kill who they are. They want to kill that gender and become somebody new and give somebody else that new name. And people think it's loving to say, hey, I'm going to just do whatever you want me to do. But the loving thing to do is say, I'm not going to celebrate you thinking you're the worst thing that's ever happened in the world and that who you are needs to be put to death and somebody else put in their place. But rather, I'm going to love you and not celebrate the evil that you're doing to yourself, but love you. And not rejoicing in wrongdoing, but rejoicing with the truth as far as love goes is us loving what is good for people regardless of whether they want it or not. Rejoicing in the truth regardless of whether it's the thing that will make them the happiest or not. Love bears all things. That love will endure the slights, love will endure the hurts, love will endure the offenses, because love is not conditional. Love believes all things. Now, this is a hard one because it seems like it's just you're a sucker. Love is a sucker that just gets taken in every time. But this is not love believes everything they're told because they're a sucker. But love keeps believing in people, regardless of how many times they fail. Love continues to offer a second chance. Love keeps believing. Love keeps loving. Love hopes all things. This goes back to that encouragement that Paul talks about, that I want you to be people who are continually expecting the best and working toward the best, regardless of how many times you've gotten knocked down. Love endures all things. Love keeps going. You want to be knit together in love as a church? You don't get warm, gooey feelings towards each other, but you do the work of love toward each other. You forgive, you show mercy, you show grace, you give second chances, and you're knit together in love. Paul says, I want you to be people of hope. I want you to be knit together in love. And he says this in the rest of Colossians 2:2. He says, I want you to do this to reach all the riches of full assurance of understanding and the knowledge of God's mystery, which is Christ. We talked about this mystery last week. This Gnosticism heresy that they were dealing with that said, oh, we have super secret knowledge. It's a mystery to all the rest of you. We have that. You don't have that because we're special and you're not special. And he said to them last week at the end of chapter 1, the mystery is this. It's the same mystery everybody else has been trying to solve. It's the same mystery that every religion in the world has ever tried to solve. How do you make yourself right with God? And the solution to the mystery, the mystery, the revelation of the mystery is this, is that you cannot make yourself right with God. It's not possible for you to make yourself right with God. It doesn't matter how many times you pray. It doesn't matter what rules you keep. You are not sufficient. And what makes Christianity different from all other religions is not that we all say we should love our neighbor, so we're basically the same. There's a couple of differences here and there. But the difference between Christianity and every other religion is that Christianity says there is no way for you to make yourself right with God. There is only Jesus who makes you right with God himself. And that you realize that you are a sinner who cannot do this, that he is the only Son of God that can, and you cry out to him and say, I can't. I need you to. That is the mystery. And what Paul says is, I want you to be hopeful. I want you to be knit together in love, but I also want you to be knowledgeable. I want you to learn. I don't want you to settle for just my grandfather was a pastor, he would have called it top water. I don't want you to just settle for the things at the top, the shallow understanding, but I want you to go deep into the understanding and knowledge of what Jesus has done for you. I want you to learn the scriptures. I want you to learn that. I want your church to be a knowledgeable church. And the thing about being a knowledgeable church is there's two parts to this. There's the teaching, but then there's the willingness to listen and learn. And for us to be a knowledgeable church, as Paul calls us to be, I study, and I prepare, and I teach. Our small group leaders study, and they prepare, and our Brother Roger teaches, studies, and prepares, and teaches. Miss Karen is not even allowed at the house on Wednesdays because she's going to disturb him. He takes all of Wednesday to study and prepare, to teach. But if you're not willing to show up and listen and learn, I can't make you. Paul says, I don't want you to just be loving. I don't just want you to be together, but I want you to be knowledgeable about the things of God. The mystery has been revealed to you. He says in verse 4, I say this in order that no one may delude you with plausible arguments. He said, the reason that you're not unified, the reason that you're not the church you need to be right now is because you've got all these people coming in and you don't know enough to recognize nonsense when you hear it. And so these people come in with plausible arguments, and you're like, well, that sounds good. Well, that sounds good. Well, that sounds good too. I don't know what to think. And there's division all over the place. He said, I want you to be knowledgeable, not for the sake of knowledge, not so that you can look down on other people who have less knowledge than you, but so that you are wise and understanding enough to recognize the truth when you hear it and when you see it. And if we are a church that's dedicated to understanding, to learning. And we do it not with resentment, but with love for one another. Then what can break us apart? If we're knit together in love, if we have hope, if we understand what's going on, what can stop us? He says this, "For though I am absent in body, yet I am with you in spirit, rejoicing to see your good order and the firmness of your faith." And he says, I want to be there with you so bad, but I can't. And so it's up to you. But I want you to know I'm watching and I'm cheering you on. If you could decide what your kid was going to be like when they grew up, what would you decide for them? If you could decide what this church was going to be like, what would you decide? Because Paul said, I want that so bad for you. This is the church I want you to be. And there's time for a lot of you to make some decisions about what your kids are going to be like. There's time for you to shape that. Some of you, there's no more time. You have reached that point. They are who they're going to be. And what you get to do next is watch the grandchildren and hope it works out for the grandchildren. But this church, we still have every opportunity to decide what kind of church we're going to be. Are we going to be a hopeful church? A church that prays with the expectation of answer? A church that spends our money, that spends our time, that spends our effort, that spends our hope and our love because there is an expectation that there will be a reward and a result at the end of that? Or will we be a church that is stingy with our money, our hope, our love? Will we be a loving church? A church that continues to offer mercy, that doesn't just love people who are easy to love, but loves people even when they're not easy to love, that loves as a decision. Courtney and Cody got married just a little while ago. And I really basically say the same things every time that I do a wedding ceremony. And Brittany tells me I need to change to something else, but you know, once you get it perfect, you gotta. But every time I talk to a couple who's about to get married and I'm standing there, and Courtney was standing there beautiful in her white dress. Cody was standing there and she really enjoyed how he looked too. I tell them, like, you know, it's really easy to love each other at this moment. But love is not a thing that you just feel when the moment comes. Love is a decision you make over and over and over again. And as it is true in marriage, it is true in this church. Will we be a church that's knit together in love, that continues to extend mercy, that gives people the opportunity to have bad days and not have those bad days held against them for the rest of their lives? A church that offers and seeks forgiveness? Or will be a church that is resentful and divided? What will we decide? Will we be a knowledgeable church? Look, I'm trying, guys. I'm trying. I want to teach you. I struggle to make sure that I'm doing a good job teaching you, to teach you everything that I can. I know our small group leaders do the same thing. But I don't get to decide whether you learn or not. You do. If we're going to be a church that is knowledgeable and understanding, we have to have the first step of good teaching, but then we have to do something with it. And if we want to be a church that can weather division, a church that can weather disagreements, a church that can weather things that come in from the outside, then you have to take the step of being knowledgeable, of learning, of taking advantage of what's available to you. And finally, are we going to be a unified church? A church that is not a church that all likes the same kind of preaching. A church that is knit together in love and hope and encouragement. Who will we be? We're having a business meeting today. I wish that I could put on the agenda. The deacons have recommended a motion that we be an encouraged church, a loving church, and a unified church. I wish I could do that. We could vote on it, but that's not how this works. If we want to be this kind of church that Paul has called us to be, it's not decided in a business meeting, it's decided by you every day. Every time you have a choice to make, you decide how this is going to be. It's very, very frustrating as a pastor sometimes that I can't make you do stuff. Like a CEO could just fire people that don't do things the way he wants them done. You say, hey, I'm going to give you a raise if you do it the way I want you to do it, and we're going to dock your pay and demote you if you don't. But all I can do is teach and encourage and lead by example. But the fate of this church lies in your hands, not mine. You decide how we'll be. You decide who we will be. You decide. The thing about this church is about 4 times the size it was 5 years ago. And that's awesome, and it's also kind of scary for the people that were here first, because we have this conversation a lot, like, okay, it's kind of like when you see the U-Haul from California pull up in your neighborhood, right? They moved here because it's a special place, but don't bring all that stuff with you, right? How do we keep who we are while inviting other people in? How do we keep what's special about Solid Rock and still do the job we've been given to do? How do we do that? And I think this is the answer. If we will keep hope, if we will knit each other together in love, if we will learn and understand and stay unified, then what's special about Solid Rock will stay special. But you have to decide how it's going to be. So what will you decide for us? In the way that you interact, in the way that you vote at a business meeting, the way that you talk to each other, the way that you reach out to each other, the way that you pray for each other, the way you show up, what will you decide? Who will we be? Because the burden of this is on you. I would make you if I could, but I can't. So let us decide together. Would you stand with me? Our Heavenly Father, I come before you right now, and I'm so grateful for this message from Paul. And as we look to Paul's letter that he wrote to the church at Colossians, and we just took 4 verses, Lord, and I realize this is just 4 verses with not a whole lot to it, but it is a plan for us, Lord, for us to follow for the rest of our lives as a church. As Paul sat back from prison in Rome and looked from a distance at this grandchild of a church, Lord, he looked at them and he had this hope for them. And he said, I don't just have this hope for them, but all those who I have not seen face to face, and that's us. And so, Lord, I ask that you would answer Paul's prayers for us, that you would make us hopeful and loving and unified and knowledgeable, Lord, that you would change us. I ask that you would give us the courage and the wisdom to recognize that this decision does not belong to me, but to each one of us. And Lord, I ask that you would give us the courage, the recognition of the opportunities, the strength, the compassion, the love for one another to do that, Lord. And as we look at this and we see this mystery that's been revealed to us, Lord, the mystery of how to be made right with God, I ask that if there is any here today that does not know you, Lord, that their concern would not be about the church and the destination of the church, because they're not part of that. But they would recognize that for themselves, they have to make their own choice. Will they accept what you've offered or not? Will they join what we're doing by accepting that or not? And I ask they would not delay that decision, but they would make it today. It's in Jesus' name I pray all these things, Lord. Amen.